Good morning, saints, and good morning, sinners. I hope this thing is working again. It feels like my whole life is out of control at the moment. Now, I'll confess, I am a bit of a control freak. And don't take offense that if we get in the car together, that I'm going to insist that I will be driving. It's not that I think that you're a maniac. Well, in the back of my head, I do. I have to be in control of the steering wheel. Chalk that up to maybe my time in Iraq. Too many convoy missions where I sat in the back having no control over anything. Or chalk it up to being on helicopters where you have no control over anything. And when the crew chief comes by and he notices your look of fear and panic, because the oil is leaking all over your suit and you're feeling like you're a Roman candle about to go off. And he says, "Don't worry, chaplain. It's when the helicopter quits leaking oil that you need to be worried." Wait, what? Yeah, I'm a bit of a control freak. And you've probably noticed that when I get in the car with you. My wife will always say, I have to drive because I have to have that feeling of being in control. I hate flying because I'm sitting in the back of the plane and I don't have control of anything. Control issues, yeah, I have them. During these 40 days of Lent, we've been talking about giving up things, giving up expectations, giving up wealth, giving up the need to be right, giving up enemies. And today we talk about giving up our need to be in control. This is supposed to be Palm Sunday. A lot of planning and work goes into Palm Sunday and Holy Week. Yay! And then all of a sudden this virus hits this pandemic, and everything that we planned for goes out the window. I'll be honest, I waited until the last minute for this Holy Week because I just couldn't accept that it was going to be postponed or canceled or that we would have to do it virtually. Certainly not how I imagined I would be in control of this situation. I hate that. Think for a moment about Jesus. This is Palm Sunday. The day he arrives into Jerusalem. And the crowds come out of their houses and they swarm the city streets. And they lay their blankets across his path. And they cut palm branches and they wave them. And they sing Hosanna in the highest, Alleluia. They hail him as king. And as this day continues, the events of Jesus' life will quite literally spiral out of control. He will go on to cleanse the temple, which offends the religious leaders of his day, who then turn around to plot his death. They also conspire with one of his closest disciples, Judas. Judas, we don't really know why he betrayed Jesus. Maybe it was for the money. Maybe it was because Judas was disappointed that after all this hoopla, Jesus simply stopped and went and prayed, and there was no revolution. Maybe he is disappointed. But as the week drags on, Jesus finds that he's not in control of events. He makes his way to the garden in Gethsemane, and there in the Bible we read the story where he's praying. Tears and blood flow from his eyes. He is so worried, so filled with anxiety, so afraid. And eventually, he just says, Father, if it's your will, let this cup pass from me. But more importantly, not my will, but your will be done. I think in the story of Jesus during this Holy Week, we could learn a lot about what it means to give up control. You see, control is that need to be in control of things. The need to be in control reveals our fear of not being in control. We're afraid that life will spiral out of control, and so we try to do anything that we can to recapture that control. Our need to control is a revelation that we're afraid, that we're full of anxieties, that we desperately want things to work out the way we want them to work out. We have a list of expectations, and the more we control things, the more we think those expectations will be fulfilled. But that's not how life works. Even the best laid plans will eventually be thrown out the window because of life's circumstances. Certainly, I was not thinking of being here on Palm Sunday in this empty sanctuary. I thought at least today I would film this from the altar, and that I was even going to post your pictures on each of the pews. But then I thought, wait a minute, they're not going to like that because they won't be in control of where they're sitting. And there's one thing I know about Christians: they love to be in control of their pews. But I did decide to come up here anyway, because being in the sanctuary gives me a little feeling of control, I guess, even if it is empty. No one expected this pandemic, and even when we heard about it in China, we certainly didn't believe it would be as bad as they said it was. And then it came to our shores. And watching things on the news media can often feel quite surreal until it happens to us. We've had our first positive case of the coronavirus in Carroll County, and many of us are afraid of what happens next. How many will catch it? How many will fall ill? How many will get desperately ill that they have to be in an ICU? As Donald Rumsfeld once said, and I know this sounds like nonsense, but if you think about it, there's actually a lot of truth. Life presents us with a series of facts. There are the known knowns, there are the known unknowns, and there are the unknown unknowns. And those things conspire together to leave us feeling like we have no control over anything. And when we feel like we have no control of anything, that's when we get angry. That's when we get afraid. And that's when we do stupid things. We don't know what this virus is really going to do, because quite frankly, we don't know the data. Not everyone is being tested. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of people are not being tested. So we don't know how many are infected. We don't know how bad the death rate is. We don't know how bad the seriously ill will be, because we simply are facing too many variables that we know nothing about. If we take anything from history, the Spanish flu of 100 years ago, and what a horrible name, the Spanish flu, because that pandemic actually started in Kansas. It should have been called the Kansas flu or the American flu, but they didn't have social media back then, and quite frankly, we were at war, and the country was shut down from news. And the only country that was reporting the news was Spain. And they're the first ones to report this new contagion of flu. If we take the Spanish flu, for example, it started in the spring, died away in the summer, came back in the fall, and then hit again the next spring, each time catching people by surprise. We don't know if this is going to last 2 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, or as some have said, even 18 months. We don't know what precautions that we're going to have to live through. Yeah, a lot of people are panicking. They're afraid. They're trying to wear gloves and masks, and that's a good thing if you're washing the mask and changing your gloves often. If you're not really doing anything. Those actions, really, if we think about it, are just our way of trying to maintain a little bit of control over things. Because as humans, we have that strong desire to be in control of everything. And quite frankly, as we're learning, life has a way of snatching control from us. And we're left confused and dazed. We're left with nothing but anxiety and worry and fear. And all too often, those things combine together to make us very, very angry. I've seen it. People getting angry at others for not doing what they think they should be doing. That's just the need to be in control again. To control others makes us feel better because it feels like we're doing something. Staying at home, being quarantined, well, quite frankly, that's boring. But it also feels like we're not doing anything to solve this crisis. And so we try to find ways to snatch that control back. This Lent, especially Palm Sunday as we go through Jesus' last days, I think we have a lot to learn from him. He too, during this week, was filled with all sorts of anxiety and worry. He was afraid. So afraid that he cried tears of blood. So afraid that he prayed and prayed and prayed that God would take this cup from him. And yet in the end, he said, God, I know that I'm called to trust you wholeheartedly, to believe that you hold my life in your hands and that no matter what may happen, you will see me through it. Now, Jesus didn't believe that God would somehow send a legion of angels to rescue him. As a matter of fact, he told his disciples, I could have asked for that, but instead, I simply asked to trust in my Father in heaven. Jesus didn't ask to be spared the agonies of the cross. As my New Testament professor always taught us, Christ didn't go around the cross or beneath the cross or over the cross. Christ went through the cross. And when he says for us to pick up our cross and carry it too, that doesn't mean we're trying to avoid what lies ahead. It means we're called to carry the burden of trust as well. How do we give up control? Boy, that's a toughie. When I was in Iraq, I quickly learned this was a situation of utter chaos and, quite frankly, utter boredom as well. You see, living in a war zone, living in Iraq, it was like this. It was moments, long moments of intense boredom, interspaced with moments of chaos and hell, when your life felt completely out of your control. You had to learn to adapt. And we had a saying over there, and I think I'll share that with you. It's a concept called, shall we say, embrace the suck. In other words, we're in this, we might as well accept it. You see, some of us, we couldn't accept that fact. And a lot of my sailors and Seabees and Marines, they had a tough time. They grew despondent. They kind of got that 1,000-yard stare in their eyes because they let the fear overwhelm them. But most everybody else, they embraced the suck. They realized that, yes, we're in an environment that's completely out of control. So what do? We find the little ways that we can be in control. We focus on what we're supposed to focus on. We focus on the mission, and we do what we can do, and we forget everything else. Because everything else is outside of our control. Why worry about it? We don't know what this virus is going to do. We don't know how long we're going to be in quarantine. We don't know how many it's going to infect. We just don't know. But hey, let's quit worrying about that, and let's focus on what we can control. How many of us have longed for a block of time? Oh, if I just had 2 weeks or a month, I could learn a new language, or I could finish that project at home that I always wanted to do. Or I could accomplish this, I could accomplish that. I could read these books that have been stacked in my corner for so long. Well, guess what? Right now, those are things you can control, that you can do. Get up, do something, finish that list. It'll make you feel better. And it'll take your mind off not being in control of this world. There's so many ways that we can live through this. But one of the most important is that we can walk in the footsteps of Christ. When we feel overwhelmed with worry and anxiety, when the fears are just bubbling up inside and we just want to scream and lash out at people, maybe we need to stop and pray. God, not my will, but your will be done. That's hard to do. One of the worst things I see happening is the blame that's going on in our country. There has to be a reason. So we blame those who aren't taking the necessary precautions. We blame those from other states who are flooding in here. We blame other countries. When, in fact, we're going to need everyone to survive this. We're going to need everyone working together if we're going to find a cure and find a way to live through this. Turning against one another is not going to help. Turning against one another is going to make this worse. Be more like Jesus. Be more like my sailors and Marines and Seabees. Embrace the suck. Deal with it. Accept it for what it is and find new ways to live. This might take months, might take weeks, we don't know. But we can make the most of our time right now. We can make the most and see this as an opportunity to do new things. We can do this. We can survive, and we can grow from it, and we can be better people for it. Don't give in to the temptation to be in control. Remember Jesus' temptations at the mountain? When the devil offered Jesus everything, as long as he worshiped him, and Jesus said, "Nope, that's not how I'm called to live my life. I'm called to follow God wherever God may lead me. And if that means God is leading me to the cross, then so be it." I want to say one last thing about the need to be in control. That temptation causes us to say and do and believe outlandish things. I want you to be aware of that, because quite frankly, there are a lot of voices in our country that are desperately trying to be in control of their lives, and so they say stupid things. For instance, I've heard some televangelist tout cures if you will send them money. There's a guy north of us. Can't believe he's even on TV still after all of his scandals, and yet he's back again. I've heard some blame this on the Chinese. I've heard some blame it on, yes, the current group that we blame everything on, the LGBTQ. I've heard people blame it on that group or that group. I've heard people blame it on the fact that somehow our country is no longer religious or following God. So this is God's punishment. My friends, God doesn't work that way. Some people ask, did God send this virus? Is God's hands in this virus? I adamantly say, hell no. God is in our hearts. And if we will let God work through us so that we can be the hands and the feet of Christ, if we can speak words of love and encouragement, we will bind this world together and we will overcome. And we will survive this, and we'll be stronger for it. And we will show the world what it means to be Christians. God didn't cause this. That's some preacher's idiotic attempt to be in control by saying something absolutely blasphemous. Beware of the false prophets and the wolves in sheep's clothing who will try to blame certain people for what's going on. That's their lame excuse to try to be in control. As for me, I guess I'll follow Jesus. I'll pray as hard as I can. I'll remember the words that one of my teachers spoke to me so long ago when she gave me this rosary. Whenever you're afraid, whenever you feel like you're out of control, or you're anxious, or you're worried, just remember that when you touch the beads of this rosary, that God is only the whisper of a prayer away. I've always found that to be good advice. That when my life seems out of control, it's not really up to me to try to grab the wheel from God and take over. It's up to me to simply sit there and trust that God will bring me through it. Now, my friends, we're not together as a community, and I've always enjoyed being here together to share Holy Communion. When we can come and break bread together and to share in the cup and to share in the bread. But you know what? We give this up for each other. Just as Christ gave himself up for us, we give up our sacraments, we give up our gatherings out of our love for one another because we want everyone to be safe. Now, you're more than welcome to come for our drive-thru communion, but just remember that one day we will gather again. That day will come, and we will break bread together, and we will share in Christ's love. Until then, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back, the sun shine warmly upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of God's hands. Amen.